Greetings, listeners. Squancho the Monkey Boy here once again to read another section from the epic debut novel, Ballsfart and the Forest of Penises. Today, I just wanted to start off by saying thank you to everyone again who has supported this YouTube channel, the Facebook page, the Patreon, and the Reddit. I have been looking more into the Reddit, and it seems that it's been used for a lot of different things. It's kind of confusing, and it seems to have been used for collecting elven pornography, as well as a cult and a political movement, and as some sort of fantasy role-playing game. So that's interesting. Lately, it seems that it's been more focused on the book, and I think that's probably for the best. Concerning the YouTube community, I just wanted to highlight a couple of recent comments that we've gotten on the readings. And first up is someone calling themselves Gizzard Snatcher. Gizzard Snatcher has been very consistent in their support of Ballsfart, and commented on this reading as well. Gizzard Snatcher writes, "Wow, he really knows how to consistently fuck up, lol, whatever that means. I think there was more profanity than not in this chapter. Good job. I was beginning to worry, but I'm glad you are feeling better." Well, that's nice, I guess. I'm glad that I'm feeling better too. And I'm glad that, despite the profanity, that some people can actually enjoy it for the profanity. That's interesting. I'm more interested in the adventure of it all, I thought it was supposed to be a rousing and thrilling adventure story, but, get what you can. Another commenter wrote, this one's name is Seth Sakarazaki. Much apologies for mispronouncing your name, Seth. And Seth writes, "I'd been having trouble sleeping lately until I found this. I just put it on the playlist and I'm asleep in no longer than 30 minutes. This has unintentionally become my favourite bedtime story. Thank you." All right. Well, like I said, I thought it was supposed to be more of a thrilling thing, but, different strokes. So, anywho, it's time that we get to the new chapter. And hopefully this one will have a bit less profanity for your pal Squancho. It's chapter 12, entitled... Shit Gets Weird. Where was I? Oh, right. Giant millipede. So I was staring at this giant millipede, right? That shit was crazy. There was like a T in the pathway, the cave splitting into two different directions, and that long freaky thing stretched as far as I could see down either fork. It was moving too, from right to left, but there was no way to tell just how long it was. Colour-wise, it was dark red and shiny, and size-wise, I'd say it was probably about as big around as a fat man's thigh, though it's important to note that though I was still very fat at that time, I did not actually have any legs to compare to the millipede during this part of the adventure. Not that I would have, of course. The damn thing gave me the heebie-jeebies. And though I normally tried the left path first at a fork, seeing as that was the direction that this thing was heading, I decided to go right instead. Unfortunately, that cave was pretty narrow, and at some points I actually had to flop snakily beside the creature, often coming within no more than a few inches of its shuffling, segmented mass. but somehow it never seemed to notice me, each of its creepy little legs just continuing their march in mindless unison. So on and on I crept beside the horror for probably something close to half a mile. And the whole time, the millipede never even stopped moving, and I never saw the end of its incredible length. At one point, I considered stabbing it with the lance, but the millipede wasn't causing me any harm, and honestly, given how freakishly long it had to be, I probably didn't want to fuck with whatever was waiting for me at either end of its body. Eventually, I came at last to another branch in the path, and as its body continued crawling from one tunnel, I took the other, bidding farewell to my big, bizarre, and never-ending travel companion. This new path was significantly rockier than the last one, but it also climbed upward, which I took as a good sign. I was, after all, hoping to reach open air at some point in my life. Still, though, fish flopping was tiring work enough, and adding climbing into the mix really took the fight out of me. In my left hand, I still held a pair of wet spider legs, perhaps thinking that I might find some way to eat them once I got hungry enough to consider such things. But halfway up the tunnel, I started getting really winded, so it was then that I took a break and used the free moments to test out the edibility of raw cave spider. I raised one of the open sockets to my mouth and then licked it. My first thought was that it tasted like a cadaver's pussy, which is a flavour that I'm unfortunately very familiar with. Though I'm not proud to say it, and yes, that is certainly a story for another day, but we're only getting off track again. I gave the spider's open leg socket another lick, because you've got to try everything twice before you're sure. But yeah, no, this wouldn't work. Not right now, anyway. It was too nasty and bitter, and its long, wet hairs got mixed in with the goo. Sure, if it really came down to it, I would slurp the innards before taking my last dying breath. But right now, I could afford to tempt hunger for a little bit longer. Upward, I continued climbing, and the path seemed to be getting steeper. That is, until it wasn't, at which point it declined again. Fuck. Finally, after another half hour, it levelled out, probably at the same altitude that it had started. Motherfucker. All vertical progress virtually erased. As this stretch of tunnel went along, it continued being generally level, but I noticed that the floor was also becoming cracked, and that those cracks grew larger the further I went along. Soon, they were deep enough that I wondered what sort of strange geological event could have resulted in such fissures. Volcanic activity? Possibly. Maybe just an earthquake, though, too. Or... fuck... maybe even magic. Hard to tell where I come from. At length, I came to a crack that was so large that I had to almost jump over it. I stuck the alliance inside to see how deep it really was, and the tip reached down about 5 feet. Cautiously, I then flopped over the gap before continuing on, where I soon came to another deep crack, though this one was far too wide for me to hop over. Oh boy, time to get clever. I stuck the lance into the crack and was happy to see that it could reach the bottom. Then I gauged the distance and after a bit of consideration concluded that I could probably use the lance to pole vault across. I then pointed the lance tip down into the ravine and pressed the handle against my body, gripping it with everything I had. Then, in one swift, fluid motion, I pushed outward with enough might to swing across the crack and land safely upon the other side. Unfortunately, that's not what happened at all. See, I had forgotten that the lance was magically imbued with the power to pierce any surface. And being as it was at that time that I were a rather rotund fishman, my body exerted a large amount of downward force on the lance, driving it into the rock beneath me. So, instead of me gliding through the air and landing upon the other side as planned, I instead got about halfway across the ravine and was suddenly jerked to a halt, immediately falling into the crack and smacking the back of my head on the ledge. By the time I realised what had happened, my fat, scaly ass was already wedged, immobile, beside the lance, deep within the crack. The back of my head was sore as fuck, too, and my hip was now bleeding from where the tiny serrated edges of the lance had cut into me. Fucking shit. I was supine, more or less, but I couldn't reach either the tip of the lance or the sides of the crack to help myself up. Angrily, I throttled from side to side, hoping to get out of the crevice, but this action only dug the lance further into my hip. Fuck! I screamed into the empty darkness. I shifted again, but the lance only dug deeper, and so again I screamed once more. Holy shit! I was seriously fucked, you guys. And that's about the time that I started to hear scuttling. It was distant, but I could definitely hear it, and I knew immediately that it had been drawn by my screams. Fucking shit! I knew that scuttling all too well. Suddenly, a giant woolly spider pounced down upon me from seemingly out of nowhere. But luckily, I had some idea that it was coming and was able to catch it by the legs before it landed on my face. Its first move, of course, was to gouge my forearm with its fangs, but I'd grown wise to the simple tactics of the cave spider. I grabbed the fang before it could stick me, and then, with my other hand, I grabbed its other fang. I then just pulled each fang apart with all my strength. The ugly fucker seized wildly, but it didn't matter. I didn't care. The right fang popped off, and I continued holding on with my other hand. At this point, I could feel its very weird little mouth clapping at my palm, as though it were trying to bite me with its pathetic little jaw. But I just smiled and dropped its fang limb behind me before palming its face and ripping its other fang out. This left the creature gasping and just generally freaking the fuck out. And for something with emotionless black beads for eyes, it sure displayed a lot of mortal terror then. For a brief second, I honestly considered just letting it go, letting it run away and bleed out, and normally I think I would have done that, but given my current predicament, I was not feeling very charitable. So I then began breaking off its limbs. One by one, its spider slime dripping down upon me in gobs and spurts. At any point, I would have stopped had it seemed to be dead, but I could tell that it was just barely still alive, and that's how I wanted it. Finally, with all its limbs ripped off, I held it before my face and stared deep into its 8 shining little eyes, verifying that it was still in fact alive. I then brought its bleeding, twitching torso to my bosom and gave it a big old hug, just like a teddy bear. I was alone, pinned in place in an empty cave, and I might have to wait days for my fishy ass to turn into legs so that I could escape this predicament. In that moment, I needed whatever comfort I could get, and as that spider's bleeding nubs rubbed against my belly, its weird little mouth opened and closed on my chest, still gasping for air, like the little guy was trying to suck at my nipple. At the time, I remember thinking that it was sort of adorable. But now there was nothing else to do. I just wanted to take a nap. So I clutched the dying cave spider's torso and rolled to my side to get comfortable. Wait a tick. Holy shit. I rolled back. What the fuck? I was moving. I could slide. The slime! The spider slime was lubricating. Without hesitation, I rubbed the dying creature all over my exposed body like butter, oiling myself up. I turned again, and then again, and though it wasn't easy, it was working. Inch by inch, I twisted myself right side up until I could reach the edge of the crevice with both hands. Then, with all my legendary upper body strength, I pulled myself out of the crack. I was so happy that I nearly cried, but I didn't cry. Instead, I reached out to grab the lance, and after twisting it back and forth for a minute, I was able to pull it back out of the crack. I then looked back down at that quivering, pathetic spider torso, still bleeding, still alive, and still staring back up at me. Thanks for nothing, you ugly piece of shit, I said while popping off my cock shell. I then tossed it right at that spider's face before taking a much-needed piss all over its body. And in case I have not made this thoroughly clear, I absolutely fucking hate cave spiders. I then turned and continued down the path, but did so cautiously, as I knew more of these fuckheads were probably waiting for me. I was right. There was another set of nests waiting just around the corner, but I successfully skewered 2 of them right out of the air. Fuck yes. The third one was trickier, though. That one I only grazed with the lance. It landed on the wall and then climbed up to the ceiling before leaping downward upon me. Normally I could have just dodged this, but I was far too fishy, so I had to do a full barrel roll instead. And as I turned to see where it was, it nearly caught me in the face with another pounce, landing upon the wall behind me instead. Perfect. I ran it through with the lance, so hard in fact that the tip went a few inches into the wall. Pinned in place, the cave spider convulsed and curled around the lance. Quickly, I searched around for a rock or something to punch it in the face with before it died, but sadly I couldn't find one. Having missed such a golden opportunity, I begrudgingly grabbed the handle of the lance and tried to pull it out, but the damn thing was really in there. I pulled again and again, but nope. Not moving. Shit. I guess I didn't know my own strength. I tried the twist maneuver from before, and thankfully that eventually did the trick. But as I pulled the lance from the wall, I noticed that the dead spider had left a big, white, slimy stain around the lance hole. And the lance hole was about 1 inch wide, and probably about 5 or 6 inches deep, and now covered in lubricating spider slime. Oh no. Please don't do it. Oh no. I looked around to see if anyone was watching. Of course, I was alone in the cave. I then checked to make sure that there weren't any more spiders coming and found that there were no other nests nearby. I then investigated the hole up close, even putting my finger in it. It was smooth. Fuck. All right, I'm not proud of what happened next. It had been a really long time, okay? Let's just get to the point. I fucked a hole in a cave wall that was lubed up with spider slime. Listen, it was far from the most fucked up thing that I'd ever fucked, and probably not even the most fucked up thing I had done on this trip. In preparation, I slapped around my chode for a minute, getting it nice and firm for insertion before plunging it like warm putty into that slippery tube in the rock wall. Oh, it was very cold, but honestly, I had a pretty good time. Flap, 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 flap. My belly, balls, and fish parts slapped against the wall of the cave, and deeply I tried to imagine someone bone-worthy. Princess Tits. That's not a bad place to start. I thought about her tits and how big they were, and how big and firm those jugs were when she whipped them out with her baby soft little
nipples. Oh yeah, I thought as well about her big, fine ass too. Sure, it wasn't as big and as fine as her sister's, but it was still pretty nice. Good stuff. This was working. And then I thought about Princess Tit's sister, Princess Ass. Oh, yes, ma'am, that booty. And no, I'm not sure why their dad named them Tits and Ass, as though he knew about their tits and ass from birth. His name was Testes McTits, and he was an asshole. But in his defense, he also had a lot of gold, so that was cool. Maybe I could kill him and take it someday. I considered this, but despite thinking about murder, my chode was beginning to go soft. That was weird. It was time to get back in the zone. I thought about the giggling gorgons of Labia Cave. Man, those skanks were fucking crazy. Oh, and what about Antigua? Part of me didn't want to do it, seeing as she had tusks and a cloaca, but something about also being a fish person made it feel right. And at that time, I was definitely down to tear up that scaly pussy. Flap, flap, flap. I was getting a pretty good session in, all things considered, and was probably no more than a couple minutes from blowing cock snot all over that spider slime, when suddenly I heard the last sound that I expected to hear in a big dark cave. Voices. Oh boy! They were distant and they were weird, and I couldn't quite tell what they were saying, but they were definitely voices. Shit! I leaned back and nearly broke my dick off. Double shit. I was completely stuck. I guess that somewhere during my cave wall fuck fest, I had worked all of the lube out and was now just dry rubbing that rock. Fuck. The voices steadily drew nearer, and they were coming from where I had just been. That wasn't good. They might be tracking me. I thought fast. I either needed to go flaccid quick and pop myself out of there, or focus all my energy on blowing like a geyser and hoping that I had enough jizz in my balls to lube my dick back up. It was a decision that I had been forced to contemplate countless times before, and every single time I made the same choice. What? The world became empty and still. The water dripping, the air blowing,
the distant voices. Everything halted as I focused all my consciousness on my pecker. Just like how those hyena monks had taught me. My ego dissolved. I was no longer wanking, for I no longer existed. There was only the dong pounding unto infinity. There were only the balls slapping monotonously against a surface. There was only the jism raging from nuts to tip in pure and meaningless cosmic perfection. I blew my load. And sure enough, it was a big one. I then jigsawed my wiener back and forth, working up enough frothy nut butter to free me from my snare. The orgasm left me a little bit dizzy, but behind me I could hear the voices getting dangerously close. They were scratchy and gross, and there were two of them. I could hear their feet moving. I could hear them jumping over something and then landing. They must have just crossed that big crevice I was stuck in. Shit! I needed to run, but all I could do was flop. And so I flopped as quickly as I could down the path. It didn't matter if they were tracking me. Once they saw all those dead cave spiders and all that jizz dripping from the wall, it would only be a matter of time before they put two and two together. I tried to cover as much ground as I could, and luckily the path curved downward, allowing me to gain some modicum of speed. As I hastily shuffled, I tried again to make out what the voices were saying, but I couldn't, though they were still getting closer. That's when I came to another fork. As usual, I went left, and this path was no longer rocky. In fact, it led to a rounded open area with a smooth, flat floor. And in the middle of this area sat a big leg of cooked meat. Holy shit! I was starving, so I grabbed it as I flopped by, but immediately regretted this decision. That meat was, of course, connected to a thin rope. And that thin rope was, of course, connected to a small hole in the ground. And that small hole in the ground, of course, led to mechanisms which, once activated, released a large, flat wall of crude metal bars that swung down from the ceiling. This trap wall smashed into me like an iron buffalo, throwing me across the smooth floor and sweeping me into a small cage, the wall itself latching onto the cage, completing it and locking me inside. The force of the crash pushed the cage back about an inch, and I turned to find that the whole container was now lurching perilously over some sort of precipice, beyond which I could see only darkness, for I no longer had my dope-ass lance. The cage wobbled once and then twice before toppling all the way over, landing on a flat surface and beginning an endless slide to the bottom. The chute that bore me was the perfect size for this cage and immediately started winding in a circle, twisting me around and around and around. I held onto the bars as I spun, turning faster and faster, and soon began hurling a constant stream of wrenching vomit.
I'm not sure how that worked. I hadn't eaten anything since those sea slugs for breakfast, and yet still there I was, spraying puke in all directions as I spun down the slide. Suddenly, with a violent crash, the cage halted, catapulting me against the back wall. Needless to say, as I laid there, beaten, bruised, trapped, delirious, and covered in my own vomit, I was not doing very well. But still, at least there was finally some sort of light. Somewhere in the distance crackled the sporadic flickering of a burning white flame, and it was then that I realised that there had to be people down here of some sort, and those people had caught me, and those people were probably going to kill me. Damn it! I grabbed onto the bars and began pulling myself back up to my fish knees, but it felt like I'd broken every bone in my body. I struggled to turn to my side, pushing up off the floor, but again, the overall pain in my back was too excruciating. I looked around for that cooked leg of meat, for at least then all of this might have somehow been worth it. But then I remembered that the meat was connected to a rope and was probably still 100 feet up in a totally different cave somewhere, along with my dope-ass lance. Fucking damn it. Before I could process the complete extent of my current tragedy, I heard voices again. I don't know if these were the same voices as before, but they sounded very similar. They were scratchy and somewhat impish, and ahead I could see shadows approaching in the firelight. And even before they got around the corner, I could see the long ears and ridiculously big noses of their silhouettes, and knew immediately what I was dealing with. Holy fuck. This was definitely the worst case scenario. I had been captured by motherfucking goblins.
All right, well, that was quite the chapter. I got real into it at the end there, but mainly because I was just so disoriented from what came before. Just to recap, Sir Ballsfart fought another spider after getting stuck in a crevice because of his inability to gauge how his magic weapon worked. He then escaped from the crevice and did unspeakable things in a cave by himself. He then escaped from that situation and ran into a trap, and now he's dealing with goblins. Okay, well, sorry if that one was a little bit difficult for you. That one was, as you could tell, a little difficult for me to get out. Hopefully the next one gets a little bit easier, but if you know anything about goblins, then you know that's probably not the case. So, anywho, I hope everyone enjoyed this. I hope that it helped you get to sleep, or that you, for some reason, enjoyed the profanity of it. Either way, I look forward to you joining us once again next time, as we read the next chapter from the epic tale, Sir Ballsfart and the Forest of Penises. This has been Squancho the Monkey Boy. Goodbye.